Everyone has a theory about why Gen X isn't watching the World Cup. The cynics version is that we outgrew it, traded the tournament for mortgages and back pain, and a vague sense that 90 minutes is a long time to care about something that won't remember us either way. The optimists version is that we're too busy, good busy, career busy, still fixing the deck busy, involved parent busy, the kind of busy that looks like life and sometimes actually is. Both of those are wrong. The real answer is harder to explain, and it has almost nothing to do with soccer. Somewhere right now, a Gen X man named Tom is standing in front of his television. He did not plan to turn it on. He came downstairs for water, maybe a snack, maybe to check something he already forgot. But the game was loading on the screen his kid left on, and there was a crowd noise and a flag, and something crossed his face that he wasn't expecting. Not joy exactly, not nostalgia exactly. Something more difficult to name. Something that lives in the part of the brain that stores summers you didn't know you were storing. He sat down. He told himself it would just be a few minutes. He is still there. To understand what Tom is feeling, you have to go back 32 years. The World Cup came to America for the first time. Tom was somewhere between 20 and 25, depending on when in the generation you find him. Old enough to be free, young enough to believe that was permanent. The stadiums were full of people who didn't entirely understand what they were watching and didn't care that they didn't understand it. 63,000 people packed into Soldier Field to watch Germany play Bolivia on a scorching afternoon in Chicago. The president was there, Oprah was there. 90,000 at the Rose Bowl in Los Angeles because that was simply what happened that summer. Tom watched with people he loved at the time. Some of them are still in his life, most of them are not. A few he couldn't tell you the last time he heard their voice. He watched it in an apartment that no longer exists, in a body that no longer quite works the same way, in a decade that felt like it would go on forever. The USA wore jerseys that looked like someone had spilled denim on them and decided it was a design choice. There was a defender named Alexi Lalas with the kind of hair and beard combination that suggested he had recently survived something. The Americans were not supposed to matter. They advanced to the round of 16 anyway. None of that is what Tom actually remembers. What he remembers is the feeling. The specific and irreplaceable feeling of being young in a summer that seemed to have no ceiling. No one needed anything from him. His schedule was still mostly his. The future was theoretical. That apartment smelled like whatever his roommate was cooking, and it was fine. He did not know, watching Alexi Lalas head a ball in Palo Alto, that he was storing a memory he would carry for 30 years. You never do. Here is a number worth sitting with. Only 32% of Gen X Americans plan to watch the 2026 World Cup. Gen Z, 40%. Millennials, 39%. The generation that was there in 1994, the generation this tournament is literally returning for, on the same soil, in some of the same stadiums, is the least likely to tune in. The easy read is disengagement. Gen X checked out of pop culture somewhere in the late aughts and never fully checked back in. But that explanation is too clean, and it tends to miss the part where Tom is standing in front of the television at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, water in hand, going absolutely nowhere. The more honest read is avoidance, not of the sport, of the mirror. Because the World Cup in 2026 is not just a football tournament. For Gen X, it is a reunion with a version of themselves they buried quietly somewhere between the second mortgage and the kids going to high school and the realization that their parents are getting old, and so, consequently, are they. The tournament came back. The country is the same. The man watching it is not. And part of Gen X is not entirely sure it wants to be reminded of that. There is a concept in memory research called autobiographical anchoring. The idea is straightforward. The human brain doesn't store events in isolation. It stores them bundled with sensory detail, emotional state, and social context. The crowd noise, the particular heat, the specific people beside you. This is why a song from 1994 doesn't just remind you of 1994, it returns you to it, briefly and involuntarily, in a way that rational thought cannot quite replicate. Sports events, especially major ones watched communally, are among the most powerful autobiographical anchors the brain creates. They are emotionally intense. They are shared. They have clear beginnings and endings. The brain locks them in with unusual fidelity, which means that when the World Cup returns to America, Tom's brain does not simply note the tournament is happening again. It retrieves the bundle, the apartment, the people, the feeling of being 20-something and unclaimed. And then reality layers on top of it. The apartment is gone, those people are mostly gone, 20-something was a long time ago. This is not depression. This is not a midlife crisis. This is something quieter and more specific. Psychologists sometimes call it temporal self-appraisal, the gap between who you were at a particular moment and who you are now, surfaced by a trigger that connects both. Tom is not sad that he is 51. He is briefly, unexpectedly, asked to hold both versions of himself at once. And that is a heavier thing to carry than it sounds. Generation X had a specific education in what to do with feelings. The lesson was brief and consistent. Keep going. These were the Latchkey kids, the ones who came home to an empty house and figured out the afternoon alone. The ones who watched their parents' marriages unravel and learned to read emotional weather the way a sailor reads clouds, not to participate in it, but to know when to disappear. They were not raised to sit with the complicated thing. They were raised to identify it, categorize it, file it somewhere that didn't interfere with function, and get back to work. So, when the World Cup produces something in Tom that is difficult to name, grief that isn't quite grief, longing that isn't quite longing, his first instinct is to reach for the remote, because that's what you do. You keep going. You don't linger in the doorway of who you used to be. You get the water, you go back to bed. You have a full Tuesday tomorrow. But here is what the research on Gen X emotional patterns consistently finds. The suppression doesn't make the feeling smaller. It makes it persist longer, at lower intensity, beneath the ordinary week, surfacing at inconvenient moments, a song in a grocery store, a photograph on a phone, a soccer match on a television that was supposed to be someone else's problem. The men who process this well are not the ones who pushed through it. They are the ones who sat down, even briefly, even imperfectly, even in front of a game they hadn't planned to watch. The 2026 World Cup is handing Gen X something it doesn't often receive, an invitation. Not to become 23 again, that offer is not on the table and never was, but to feel something freely again, the way you can when you're 23 and nothing has calcified yet, when you can cry at a goal without immediately wondering what that means about you, when belonging to something larger than your to-do list is still allowed. A significant number of Gen X people will decline that invitation. They will be too busy or too tired or too aware that the tournament runs until July and there are things that need doing before July. They will watch the highlights later, maybe, if there's time. And some of them will make the other choice. They will sit with their kid, the one who is suddenly interested in soccer in the way teenagers are interested in things, loudly and briefly and with absolute conviction. And they will not explain that they already lived through one of these. They will just watch. When the USMNT scores, there will be a moment. It will last maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. A sound the kid will make, a sound Tom makes without planning to. And something across that gap between the man he was at 23 watching the same country do the same thing in the same summer heat will, quietly, briefly, connect. That is not a small thing. That is, in its understated and Gen X way, everything. The 1994 World Cup created what sports researchers call generational fans, people who watched their first real match that summer and carried the feeling forward for decades. Many of them had children. Those children are now teenagers, watching the tournament return to the same country, unable to fully grasp what it meant to the person next to them. And the person next to them, if they are honest, is not entirely sure how to explain it either. How do you explain that this is not just a game? that the flags and the crowd noise and the specific heat of a North American summer carry 32 years of stored meaning. That watching Erling Haaland play at MetLife Stadium carries a strange freight for Tom because Haaland's father played for Norway at that same World Cup, and Tom was in the stands or in front of a television somewhere, not much older than Erling is now. You don't explain it. You just watch. There is something in the literature on midlife psychology, the period Gen X has now collectively entered, about the value of what researchers call continuity experiences. Moments that link the present self to the past self. Not to retreat into the past, but to feel that the person who started the journey and the person continuing it are the same person. That the summers of your 20s and the Tuesday evenings of your 50s belong to the same life. Most of Gen X does not seek these experiences deliberately. They arrive uninvited, on a Wednesday night, through a screen a teenager left on. And sometimes, if you sit down instead of reaching for the remote, they do what they came to do. Tom did not watch the whole match. He fell asleep somewhere in the second half, which is the most Gen X possible outcome. Too responsible to stay up, too stubborn to go to bed before trying. But he watched enough. Enough to feel, briefly and inconveniently, a version of himself he had not checked in on in a while. The 20-something who believed things were still open, who did not yet know how much would close and what would remain. The World Cup runs until July. Tom has the schedule on his phone now. He put it there this morning and hasn't decided what it means that he did. He is not sure he will watch all of it. He is not sure he will let himself feel whatever the second match brings if the first one was already more than he expected. He is Gen X. He will probably undersell it to himself the whole way through. But the schedule is on his phone. And somewhere in that small, practical act is something closer to hope than Tom would be comfortable calling it. The game is on. He showed up. If this landed, you'll know if it did. Subscribe. Not because the algorithm asked you to, because this is a conversation worth continuing. And tell me something. Where were you during the 1994 World Cup? Or the first one you actually remember, the one that left something behind without asking permission? Are you watching 2026? Comment below. I read all of them, every single one. And this one, this particular question, I want to hear. Thank you for staying this long. See you in the next one.